So, yeah, Anna's out of town right now. But y'all bow your heads with me. Lord, thank you for bringing us here tonight. We'll have this time in fellowship with each other, Lord, and kind of learn more about where you're calling us to transform in our life, Lord, and what that looks like and where you're leading us, Lord, and help us answer your calling. Open my mouth tonight and let my words be heard, and let those ears hear. In your son's holy name, amen.
Amen.
So we've been talking about the hero's journey, right? So what that's included so far was crossing the threshold, a hero taking on the challenge of the journey, taking on the quest. And they get through the quest and they fall into the abyss, they experience hardship and trial. And now where we're going into tonight is the transformation. How they get out of that trial, how they get out of that abyss. And so, did anyone read the Percy Jackson books?
Yes.
Yeah, so you remember when they talked about the Titan Atlas? Yeah, you remember that? So for those of you who don't know, Atlas was a Titan, the guys that came before the Greek gods. And so Atlas led the charge on the heavens against the Greek gods with his other Titans. And they lost, and so Zeus punished them and punished Atlas and forced him to hold up the weight of the world and of the heavens. So, but we're not Titans, right? We're just college students. But we still experience, that kind of pride that Atlas might have experienced whenever he was leading that charge. We still experience pride throughout our day, whether you see it in someone else or whether you feel it in yourself. And kind of an apostle that might have related to that might have been Peter. And we know Peter to be kind of a teacher's pet, but he was also kind of prideful in some of the things he did. And so this is from Matthew 14, 26 through 33. But when the disciples saw him on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come onto the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So essentially, Scripture reads very differently than how it plays out in our minds. And so what I see right here, they see Jesus out in the water. They can't really see who he is too well. It's a foggy figure, so they think it's a ghost. And Jesus is like, "Do not be afraid. It's me, guys. Calm down. It's just me." And Peter says, with pride in his heart, "Well, Jesus, if it really is you, then prove it. Prove to it. Let me walk on water just like you are right now." And so Jesus, scripturally, all he says is, "Come." But in my mind, I imagine Jesus is having this internal monologue of kind of, "Well, Peter, you can try, buddy. You can try to walk on water. You're human, not me, so you're not going to be able to. But I will give you the power through your faith that you can." And so Peter receives that power and receives it through his faith and is able to walk successfully out to Jesus, but then his humanity restores to him. And he sees the storm around him, the wind, the lightning, the rain, and he sinks and he starts drowning. And he cries out to Jesus to help him, all because of his own pride, all because he had the pride to say, "Jesus, is that really you?" And so how many times in our lives do we try to be Peter? How many times do we let our pride overtake us and distract us from our faith and the power that faith gives to us? And so I can remember a time in high school when I very much related to Peter. I ran track in high school. I ran the mile, the quarter mile, and the half mile. And so near the end of my junior years, when I was really starting to kind of peak and really start to get good at it, and I finished off my year with a 5 flat in my mile. And so naturally, I was quite proud of myself. And so I became driven and really motivated to do better and better. And so senior year rolls around, we get through cross-country season. I didn't really go all out in it. Track season rolls around. I started 2 weeks early, and I was one of the top 3 runners in our half mile. And so I'm competing here with my 2 other buddies, and I was progressing very well. I was getting better and better each week, and I was never the type to talk trash to people or tell them, who's better in what area. But I still had this kind of internal monologue going on inside my head. I thought to myself, man, I am on top of the world right now. If I keep improving at the rate I am, if I keep getting this good and this much better every week, I'm going to beat Tyler and Anthony. And so I was even in early contact with the head cross-country and track coach at A&M with the possibility of walking on as a freshman. And so, of course, I'm walking around school telling my friends how I was possibly going to be a D1 track athlete, a walk-on, not a scholarship. But nonetheless, I'm going to get to run for D1. And, I was telling them, I'm going to get better. I'm going to win this race or that race. And so we reach those points in our lives where we feel like we're on top of the world. You're on top of the mountain. But the problem with that is you're looking straight down at the summit below you. And so, of course, all that pride bubbled up too much and it came to a screeching halt. We were about 5 days out from our first meet that season. We were running 60s. I was going as hard as I could trying to get ready for the meet that Saturday. And I was running. We were about 8 sets in. Felt something pop in my leg. And then it felt like there's this fire and lava inside my thigh, like inside the bone of my thigh. So I immediately step off. I could still walk. I was limping, but I could still walk. So I get in my car, I drive to the trainer's office back at the high school. And I go in there. He starts doing all these weird tests on me. He's like this cold laser thing. He's saying this and that. And he finally told me, he's like, man, you got a 4th degree tear in your left quad. And I was like, what does that mean? What's a 4th degree tear? What's that? What's the difference between that and 1st degree tear? He's like, well, 4th degree tear means your leg can physically not flex enough for you to run. So my leg couldn't flex enough for me to move it fast enough to run. And so immediately I was terrified. Immediately I was like, oh crap, what am I going to do, bro? I'm not going to get to run at A&M. I'm not going to get to finish out the season. This was my last season. I was so excited. But immediately that pride and that motivation kicked back in. Not the good kind of motivation, the arrogant kind. And so I'm like, well, what can I do? How are we going to fix this? And I'll run more meets. And he's like, well, you can do, it'll probably be about 8 to 9 weeks of rehab. And you'll probably be healed enough, you might make the meet or last 2 meets. And so we get there, and after about 8 weeks of what felt like torture some days, I finally was able to get back out on the track on the meet before regionals. Now, I wasn't going to get to run regionals because I missed some of the meets. But my coach was nice enough to let me run the 800, which is a half mile. People did the track. And so I knew going into that was my last meet possibly in my entire life. I knew, unless I pick up like some midlife crisis and start like a middle-aged track club. I was like, this is the last meet I'm going to do. And so, of course, I get out on there that Friday night, and I'm going as hard as I can. And I finished off at around a 2:08, and so that's an average time for, but not by any means good. Not by any means was I at the front of the group. I was at the very back. But nonetheless, I thought to myself, man, I still got through that. I got through this injury, and I still did okay. And I was still proud of myself in my failure. I say this all because, at the end of the night, I still felt like something was missing. At the end of the night, I got home, and I realized that track was over. The world came back to me, school came back to me. Everything was just like it had always been. And I realized track wasn't all there was to life. I've been so prideful throughout those 3 months that I missed out on what God was calling me to do. And that pride distracted me to the point that I missed the fact that those kind of things aren't the things that God wants or asks of us. Those earthly matters. Maybe when I had torn my quad, God was hinting at me that I was getting wrapped up in my pride. Not that God was the one who tore my quad, but he saw it as an open door or an opportunity to say, hey, Noah, quit being arrogant, quit being dumb, you're not being nice. And so it wasn't until everything was said and done that I had realized there was more that God was calling me to do. And that in the end, I truly understood what humility was in its rawest form. And so that's what we're kind of going at tonight, is that transformation of pride to humility. Being humble, not by God necessarily, being humbled and God using that opportunity to bring you closer to Him. And so there's another character in the Bible that represents this humility, one that we don't talk about too often, the centurion. The centurion that was there when Jesus was lowered from the cross. And so the story goes that finally Jesus had died on the cross, and when he died, the curtain of the temple was torn, and the temple started falling apart. The earth shook and cracked and rumbled, and the earth split in two, and there's tombs that were being broken open. And when the centurion and his men saw this, they said, surely he was the Son of God. And so this passage gives a lot of weight to the kind of magnitude of what occurred when Jesus died. I mean, it's talking again about temples crumbling, the earth splitting and shaking, tombs being cracked open. And that'd be pretty much just enough to make anyone say, surely that is the Son of God. I mean, if I was there, I would have said, yeah, that's the Son of God. No one else could do that. And yet what's so interesting about this story is, and Matthew doesn't fully explain this, is that it wasn't just anyone that said, surely he's the Son of God. He pointed out that it was the centurion and his men specifically. So it wasn't a simple task for a centurion to say, surely he was the Son of God, or to proclaim a belief in God at all. A Roman centurion was a commander of over 100 soldiers in the Roman army. This centurion had in all likelihood presided over hundreds, if not thousands, of these crucifixions of prisoners, and had most likely become hardened to the agony that he saw these men endure. His men that he was the commander of most likely were the ones that whipped Jesus, the ones that arrested him, the one that tore the robe off his bleeding body, the one that pressed that crown of thorns into his head. And the centurion himself was most likely the one that gave him these orders, and gave him the orders to drive those nails into his hands and feet. And the centurion is mentioned in 3 of the 4 Gospels. He's not mentioned for his cruelty, his ruthlessness, or his ability as a soldier. He's mentioned for something far more important. And that's a marvelous transformation of someone being saved, someone having a transformation immediately after the death of just what seemed to be another one of his prisoners. So the centurion had seen countless of these crucifixions. He had probably ordered most of them and executed most of them. So he knew how this process played out. He knew we put them up there on the wood, we nail them, they die, we take them down and throw them in the pile. And yet, this one was different. So just before Jesus died, he cried out, "It is finished." We know that. And just like that, the man who presided over Jesus' execution, the man who ordered the nails to be driven into his hands and his feet, became the first person to become a believer after Jesus' death. The story represents humility in 2 very distinct ways. One, a Roman centurion, someone who's prestigious and was a true servant to his country, left all his belongings behind, turned his back to his country, all for the sake of salvation. 2, God was willing and eager to save the man that murdered his son. The centurion who was dedicated to his country and his cause left all behind that he had built in exchange for his salvation. He gave up all of his pride. And more importantly, God eagerly welcomed this man into his arms. Now, as college students, again, we encounter this pride and humility every day. Whether we take pride in our grades, much like Atlas found pride in challenging the gods, or whether we find humility in what seem to be failures, again, grades, or the failure of Peter falling through the water, or the failure of my own injury. The blessing in this transformation of pride to humility isn't that you're being humbled, but that through that process of being humbled, God brings you closer to him. Even Peter found pride in his own faith, and yet God reminded him of where his faith's power came from. I myself found pride in my own accomplishments, and even my failures, yet God reminded me that I had a bigger calling. The centurion found pride in his own accomplishments, yet God welcomed him, not as a murderer and not as a soldier, but as a child of God. When we find ourselves in a state of pride, and I can say this from experience, we soon find ourselves in a state of humility. And that isn't at all a sign of failure or doubt, but instead it's a sign that God still welcomes us and that we can still come back home. So I challenge you tonight, whether you're the most humble person in this room or the most prideful, how is God calling you to transform in your life? Will you take pride in your own faith like Peter did? Or will you find humility in the grace that God offers you, like the centurion? So I leave you with this thought tonight, and I challenge you to explore how God is calling you to transform right now. Would y'all bow your heads with me? Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us here tonight. We'll have this time in fellowship with each other, Lord. I thank you for allowing us to explore what it means to be transformed by your grace and by your love and your hope that you offer to us, Lord. Pride isn't always a bad thing, but more often than not, it leads us to humility, and that humility brings us closer to you. Lord, I thank you for always giving us opportunity and always opening doors for us to grow closer to you and to know, to love you more, Lord. Lord, bless us tonight and let our hearts be open and let our ears be open. Let Let's go out into this week and learn where you're calling us to transform, Lord. We love you. In your son's holy name. Amen.